Hello, this is Debbie, and this is Light Up Your Worth. And I am excited to bring on my friend, Jillie Marie. We have, just so you guys know, this is a real treat. I have been working with, and I am sharing one of the people that I ping when I need to go and get some really good answers and feedback, and actually sometimes the shit thrown in my face about what I need to be looking at in my Akashic records. And so I am bringing, I almost think of you as like my secret weapon sometimes, right? To keep me focused, Jillie. So yeah, without diving too much into that, I want to welcome my friend Jillie Marie here, who is an incredible healer. She does a lot of really deep work in the Akash, and she's a sacred soul alignment practitioner and many other things. A Red Sox fan, and she just really is just really truthful and what's the word I'm looking for? She just tells it as it is. And
Blunt.
yeah. So welcome, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is really exciting. I had to go set a background for today. And I thought of this. I saw the records, the book, the library, and I thought, wow, this is just like a very, of course, it came up when I was looking in my own pictures of what I was going to bring in. And so, of course, I thought, oh, this would be perfect for our session today. So welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So we've been diving in and talking about a lot of like intentional healing and really going through one of the specialties that Jillie, sorry, is really good at is dealing with trauma. And so we started to kind of talk about that. And what I wanted to do is have you share a bit of your story, because I know you're very passionate about this work. And
I
so
am.
I'd really like to hear more of, how you got to be here in this incredible healing.
So I'll go backwards a little bit. My name is Jillie Maria, and I am an Akashic Records practitioner. And I found the healing arts and energy healing work healing as an after result of healing my rape. I'm a date rape survivor, thriver. For those of you who are unfamiliar, that means you're more than 3 years out of your original date. And for me, I was date raped in 2002, but I talked about it in 2013, 2014. So what brought me into the healing arts was a combination of things. I was in a space of not happy. I wasn't happy, and I couldn't pinpoint why. I just wasn't. And so one of the things that I've come to realize, not only being date raped and being in the space of dealing with other sexual trauma, but also emotional trauma. And I want to share with you that when I hyphenate emotion, I say it E-motion. And a lot of people say, well, why do you do that? Because E-motion means that emotion is simply energy in motion. And I like to make it user-friendly because our society is so bent on not allowing us to feel fear-based emotion. And the reality of life is that if we try to shut ourselves down, numb ourselves out from feeling fear-based emotion, to include guilt, grief, shame, sadness, melancholy, frustration, etc., we also unintentionally numb ourselves from feeling the love-based side of the scale, to include bliss, joy. Now, we might say we're in love with somebody, that we love somebody, but we can't have the depth of love if we're not allowing ourselves to also feel the depths of our sadness, our grief, our anger. And so one of the things that when I started talking about emotion as energy in motion, and it actually wasn't my original concept. I originally read it studying Panache Desai, and came into the space of realizing that rage is compounded anger. Anger is sadness's bodyguard. Sadness is guilt, grief, and shame's bodyguard. So if you see people that are running around and they're angry, they're actually deeply sad, or they're deeply aggrieved and don't know how to deal with it, especially men. And if you're listening to this podcast, you're watching this podcast, I want to share with you, this is not about crapping on men, but it's important to realize that we are not emotionally intelligent through the ages. In other words, starting with around World War II, we didn't have, because the whole world was on fire, and we find ourselves there again, emotionally, wrung out. I mean, this has been going on, this whole, COVID situation for almost 2 years. Our nervous systems are not built for this. They simply are not. So rather than getting ourselves into the space of dealing with and becoming aware of our anger, our sadness, our guilt, our grief, our shame, our frustration at how we wish life was, or how we wish people would just do a thing, we suppress it. And so when I hear people say, oh, I have an anger management problem, or that's just the way I am, I'll say, stop. You don't have an anger management issue as much as you have a failure to feel emotion issue. And feeling emotion doesn't kill people, right? But when we get into the space of like, how are we really going to solve something? Like my realizing as a child, and I just want to share that, because my parents are probably going to hear this. This is not a crap on you hour. It's not what this is about. But it is, because here's the thing, the shared experience of most of us in our 30s, 40s, and 50s is that we were told by our parents, grandparents, somebody in charge, if you don't stop crying, we'll give you something to cry about.
Yep.
And that cost us, right? So that
Mhm.
caused us to be in a space of, we imprinted that on our small self, sometime between the age of 0 and 8, as a trauma, number one, but number two, as the message was, it's not safe for me to show emotion. So we started stacking. So we started, no, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, right? Stiff upper lip, shoulders back, chin out, you go on with life. You shove it under the rug and you keep going. We'll deal with it at a more convenient time. Well, one of the things that I've learned, and so many of my clients have learned over the space of time is, and friends of mine as well, is that there is no good time to stop and deal with death, to stop and deal with grief, to stop and deal with the loss of a job, or even if you chose to change a job, there's still the grief of transition. Grief is just not for dead people. It's also for the living. It's for transitions that we choose to make. It's for miscarriages. It's for bankruptcy. It's for being forced to move across the country, or choosing your job versus medical freedom. All those things, there's hundreds and hundreds of examples that we just shove under the rug that all involve emotion. And if we're in this space, and they all involve grief. So if we're in the space of disallowing ourselves because we don't know how. So here's the thing. When your parents were little, someone didn't model emotional intelligence for them. So they were taught stiff upper lip it, right?
Mhm.
Rub some dirt on it, keep going. Stiff up, upper lip, shoulders back, chest out, keep going. Nose to the grindstone, we just keep going. So then when they had you, they didn't know how to hold space for their own. They would feel their own stuff coming up and didn't have any tools to feel it because they were afraid of feeling their own emotion. So they would then put that on you. They wanted to comfort you, but they didn't have any idea how. And that's why a lot of people nowadays, like when they're in the space of like trying to suppress people or cancel people, it's because we get into that space of, I don't know how to have space for anything but joy. And I say it with quotation marks because a lot of us don't know what even real joy is. If you've lived your whole life in a space of fear or anger or sadness, or you have been in survival mode your whole life, if you were raised by addicts of any kind, or people who distract, whether it's alcohol or workaholics or drug addicts, or parents who were absent from you, but they could have been physically present, right?
Mhm.
But if they're emotionally unavailable, that's the same thing. And in a lot of studies that they're starting to come out with, as we have new evidence and as we start, putting our kids and, putting our kids into therapists and normalizing that. And as we start doing more pediatric work around it, we realize there's this spiral that goes back 70, 80 years into the space of, if no one taught you, then you don't also know how to do it. And it can be, it's not just about emotion. I mean, like, one of my friends, went to college, and this is years ago, and she, back when texting was a thing, and she texted me 911 one day, and I called her back, and I'm like, oh my God, what's the emergency and the whole thing? And she's like, I don't know how to boil water. And I burst out laughing because I was like, that's your 911 emergency. But for her, she was in a dorm room with a hot plate, and they were trying to make ramen noodles, and she literally didn't know how to boil water. No one had ever taught her anything about, like, everybody had always cooked for her. So she was in the space of physically not knowing how to do a thing. And so that same thing translates to us emotionally, where if no one's ever taught us how to feel our emotion and sit with it. Like, when I teach people, the first time someone ever taught me, just sit with it. So there I am taking a breath, and I'm like, okay. And they're like, letting yourself just feel. And that evening we were working on rage. Letting yourself just feel rage. Because a lot of us feel like if we feel emotion, we have to then act it out loud. Like, you got to punch somebody or hit somebody or scream at somebody or whatever. And I sat there, and I remember thinking to myself, okay, this is going to be a really interesting call. I was really excited about it. And the leader of the call was like, we're going to start with rage. He's like, I know what you're thinking. You're all like, oh my God. And he's like, just go with me. He's like, just trust me, just go with me. So he's like, put your hands at your side. He's like, so he's talking us through, like, close your eyes, let your body relax, and just let the rage, the sadness, the anger surface. For me, latent rage causes hives. Learn that the hard way. But here's the thing. So there I am with hot tears streaming down my face. And I am like, on the one hand, no one knows I'm doing this. So I know I'm physically safe, right? Like, no one's going to yell at me. I'm not going to have a stepmother screaming at me to shut up, or anybody like grabbing me by the shoulder and trying to tell me to, stop crying, or none of that is going to happen, because no one knows I'm doing this. But on the other hand, I'm feeling this, like, feeling I've never felt before. Like, I'm feeling this rage, like, coming up out of my throat. Like, it's like almost like you have to throw up, but you don't. Like, you're not going to physically throw up, but it's this, like, and then all of a sudden just tears, like my eyes the next morning were like puffy. And being in that space of saying, oh my God, I survived, feeling like, aside from the hives, which was obnoxious, but it was like, oh, okay. Once I figured out what it was, okay, I'm good now. But it was being in that space, right, of, it's safe to feel my emotion. So then being in the space of, like, going to the rape crisis center. And I remember walking in, it was a summer day. I remember walking in, I was the only person that knew I was there. Because normally, like, usually I'll end up in the course of action just telling people, like, hey, I'm around town doing errands or whatever. And I had told nobody I was going. And I remember walking in, I remember sharing with them, like, as soon as I said that I was raped, the woman that was at it's very secure facility, it's hard to explain, but for justifiable reasons, it's all secured and locked doors and the whole bit. And as soon as I said I was, like, how can I help you? She said, how may I help you? And I said, I was raped. And she goes, oh my God, like, right now? And I'm like, no, ma'am, 11 years ago. And she was like, oh, okay. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. And so I filled out all the information, and I had a counselor walk up to me and introduce herself and whatnot. And I remember the first time that I said I was raped and sodomized out loud. And I burst into tears. And I was in this space of, like, so much shame and, like, having the flashes of everything that had happened. And I think that day it took me about 3 hours to completely get to the point of, like, I was safe to drive. I was safe to, function outside of the appointment. But I remember also you know, a lot of times we're terrified of, one of the things that I find with my clients is that people are often terrified to even speak into, they misunderstand the laws of attraction, right? So a lot of times people are terrified to speak into what's happened to them because they're like, if I say that this bad thing happened, then I'm going to call in more of it. And I'm like, no, 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 here's the deal. When I was able to say, I was raped and sodomized by my ex-boyfriend, I felt this like at once the tears stopped and whatever. It was this giant sigh of relief. I got to put down the bricks. I got to put down the rage and the anger and the shame that I had been holding on to. And here's the thing, when you say something out loud, and I've done it just saying it to myself too, right? Like just getting in front of my mirror and saying things. There's tremendous power in putting breath to it and oxygen to it to dissolve the shame. Because, and here's the thing, we all have shame about weird things. I mean, one of my friends used to love, he worked at a shoe store for the longest time when he was in high school. He loved women's feet. Loved putting one of the reasons he loved working in the shoe store. He's like, you know what I love about women's feet? And he went this whole thing one day, and I was like, wow. And he goes, oh my God. He goes, I can't believe you're judging me. And I'm like, I'm not at all. I'm fascinated. I'm like, I worked in a shoe store and I friggin' hated it. And I'm like, so I'm really curious as to I'm always curious as to people's whys. And he said, I just loved everything about, like, some women have very high arches and they love really high heels. And then some women, you know, have to have flat shoes, and some women really love boots. And he's like, it's just fascinating to me how many different, you know, millions of, he's like, can you stop and think about it? At the time, there's probably like 6 billion people on earth. He's like, can you imagine the thought of 6 billion different people, different sets of feet? Isn't that kind of mind blowing? And I kind of was in the silly space of like, yeah, it kind of is. But it's that whole notion of he shed shame that he's holding on to just by saying it out loud. And I think it's a really important point to share with people that part of the reason I came into this work was because I realized people need to be heard.
Yes, they do. Yes.
A lot of times they just heal by the simple act of like, I hear you. I hear what you're saying. And a lot of times, you know, I'll practice active listening and say, what I hear you saying is such and such a thing. Is that correct? Have I got those details right? And people will be like, oh my God. I had someone say to me, the way you just said that, I've told that story dozens of times. And the way you just said, this is what I heard you say, and I want to make sure I got the details right. They're like, I can let it go. You're like, you heard me. And there's such a magic in just being in the space of, yep, I did.
Yes, because it's almost like you give light to what needs to come out of the dark. And it almost like I can get like the visual of it just starts to just dissolve.
Mm-hmm.
You don't give power to it. And, you know, I wanted to go back to something you had said, which was when we allow ourselves to stop and feel something, how unusual, how many times has somebody felt something? Maybe you're at an inappropriate time. I know I have felt emotions my whole life, and I have very supportive. I you know, my dad's passed, but my mom is super supportive too. It's not a reflection of them too, as she does listen to my podcast. And with what they had the ability to do at the time too, with their how they were raised. And
yep, 100%.
But the whole feeling of when you do find it, even now, where people are like, if you saw me, and I have tears running down my face because I want to feel something. I don't want to suppress it any longer. I don't want to suppress something into my body or make it go and become even more complex. Is that it's really uncomfortable for other people to witness it. They always want to fix it.
Yes. Yes. And one of the things that I teach my clients is, and that's one of my criticisms of the healing arts. On the one hand, I teach my clients to just be in the space of, here's the thing, once you allow yourself to feel your emotions and you get comfortable with it, it frees you to be present and hold the space for other people to do the same. One of the reasons why we cancel out people's emotions, or we go, it's going to be okay, you're going to be fine, we cheerlead people, is because we are so damn uncomfortable with our own emotions that we can't just sit with somebody and let them be in the space of feeling their sadness, their grief, whatever it is they're feeling, realizing that it's going to flow through them. It's like water just going to flow through a pipe and then be done and dissolve. But the other thing is too, is if we, when I hear people talk about, healing modalities they're certified in, and people say, oh, I'm not a healer. I'm like, let me simplify healing for you, because it's not as, I don't think being a healer is really very woo, to be honest with you. And there's going to be someone that's going to hear this and they're going to be like, what? Yeah, it is. No, because here's the thing. Being a healer, by definition, is literally just simply holding the space. It is but when people go, what does that mean? It means you just sit and allow someone to be where they are, to feel what they feel. And a lot of us, truthfully, are crappy at it. And I know a lot of people, I won't name any names, but I know multiple people who consider themselves healers, and some of whom even have their own businesses that are horrid at holding space. They're really good at a specific modality, but when it comes down to brass tacks and my own things that I have witnessed, they're not good at just allowing people to be in their emotion. And part of what makes someone an exceptional coach or therapist or whatever practitioner thing you do is your ability to hold the space. Because here's the thing, it's not just about, for example, it's not just about running sacred soul alignments or being in the Akash or sending Reiki. It's about when the emotion, not if, when an emotion comes up for somebody, it's your ability to simply be with it, to hold the space for the person to feel the thing, so that, and that can be horribly uncomfortable for people.
Yes.
And to be, horribly. And especially if, like, again, most people are coming from a space of, and a lot of times it's subconscious, they're coming from that space of, if you don't stop crying, I'm going to give you something to cry about. So there's this physical terror of, it's not safe for me to feel emotion, so I can't do this. And I'm like, and I've had to, tell a few people, who knows you're working with me? Nobody. Okay. Does anybody know you're in this session right now? No. Okay. So it's just you and me. Yes. Yes. Okay. So I want you to take a breath, and I want you to close your eyes. And I want to invite you, I want to invite you to call forward your small injured self, the person that got yelled at whatever age that was, for feeling emotion, crying, doing what an under 8-year-old child does. It's a reaction to life. And I want you just to comfort them. I want you just to be like, what, it's okay to be crying. It's okay. You skinned your knee. Sure, it's totally okay to be crying. If someone took a ball away from you, totally okay to be crying. So, older brother or sister slammed the door in your face, totally okay to be crying. Completely natural human emotional reaction to being left out or physically getting hurt or something. And so often people will just, it's like, and they're trying to be in that space of, okay, I'm trying to tell myself, I'm like, allow yourself to just take a breath and be in the space of, I get to feel my emotion. Because we don't realize what a gift it is to feel the entire scope of our emotions until we get to do it. And I remember the first time that like you were talking about earlier, like being in spaces where you're crying at inappropriate times, right?
Yes.
And
or being called even that you're too sensitive. Like, you go and Google, there's books written about the sensitive person and how we really try to not almost squash the people. Oh, you're just so sensitive. You're just so sensitive.
And I used to take that as like, I didn't really take it as an insult because I didn't really know what it was. It was this label of like, you're really sensitive. And now I look back on my life and I'm like, No, I just was born an empath. I was born an HSP. I was born, I was born clairvoyant. And I didn't really I remember seeing like a very tall man in my grandma's house. And I'd be coming down the stairs in her house and I would see this man. And I mean, it was like, I knew it wasn't a person physically. I was fully aware that like, he wasn't my grandpa. There was no one that physically I knew him. But I can look back at it now and be like, oh yeah. And it was like realizing that that was the doctor that built and occupied the house before my grandparents bought it. And then, realizing that, being in that space of like going back and feeling emotion, like into my childhood and like being in a space, children are empaths. Children and animals are natural empaths. And I had no idea what that was. Someone actually told me one day, they said, oh, I bet you're an empath too. And I go, yeah, I am. And it just kind of came out of my mouth. And I was like, and then I had to go back and like empath, look up what an empath was because I had no idea. And they're like, oh shit. Well, the whole world now makes sense. My whole entire emotional life now makes sense. In the space of like a minute. And I was like, oh yeah. And it was like learning how to clear myself, learning how to ground and protect my energy, learning that I had the ability to do that. And it's one of the things I teach my clients as a cornerstone of working with my clients in program work is you get to ground, protect, take care of your energy, clear yourself. It is imperative that you do that so that it's like, putting your oxygen mask on first on a plane if there was an emergency. Except real life is we're not in an emergency situation, but we're in real life. And the reality is that if you're going to serve people, if you're going to take care of your business in life from a space of grace, from a space of contribution, from a space of joy, you get to take care of your energy, because otherwise, how many of us are running around? How many of us say on the daily, I have to, I should, that we should all over ourselves.
Oh, right. I say that too. Yeah, we should all over ourselves. And
I should do this. I should do that. I have to do this. And I'm like, what if you get to? What if you choose to? Like, I get to order some of my Christmas presents online. I got to choose ahead of time, like in September, have a rough idea of what I wanted to get people for Christmas. I got to plan so this week is not, oh my God, right?
mm-hmm.
All the things. I get to choose my schedule to work with clients. I get to choose to shut down for a period of time toward the end of the year to entirely take apart and then rebuild my battery, right? Like taking care of myself, doing the things that I do as radical self-care to end the year and then to start a new year. And we are masterful in this world at not taking responsibility for our emotion, for our actions, for our inaction, and then going, well, I had all these obligations. And I'm like, no, you didn't. And so often when you say that to people, they'll be, well, I had to do this. No, you chose to do it. And I invite people into the space of, I choose to. I also invite them into the space of, you're not, you're am. And what I mean by that is a lot of times people say, I am angry, I am frustrated. But if we get to allow ourselves into the space of, I'm experiencing and feeling anger, I'm feeling sadness, I'm feeling frustration, that allows you to release it. Because if something becomes part of who I am, like I had one of my friends who about 6 months ago messaged me and said, I'm fat and I really need to lose weight, but I hate running. I hate this. I hate that. And I said, okay. I said, well, may I? Well, that's why I reached out to you. I'm like, okay. I'm like, do you want to take a breath and let go of your crunchies for just a second? She was like, I don't know what to do. I'm frustrated. I said, okay, take a breath and realize what you just said. Because I am are two of the most powerful words.
Yes, they are.
you're experiencing frustration, and frustration is the space between where we think we ought to be and where we are. So if we break down the word game, I feel frustration because I have taken on an extra 30, 40, however many pounds she had on her. And I realized I hate running and I don't know what to do. And I need to stop eating and I need to this and I need to that. And I said, okay, you get to keep track of your food for 10 days. You get to choose to be aware of when you eat. Are you bored when you eat? Are you tired when you eat? Are you, like disinterested? Are you eating your emotions? Curiosity. Lead from curiosity. So you're not blaming or shaming yourself. You're just being like, isn't it interesting that when I get bored, I eat? Or isn't it interesting that when I am around other people, I'm a social eater? Like some people are social drinkers or social smokers. Like they never do it by themselves, but they do it around other people. I want you to replace I'm fat with I am holding on to an extra X number of pounds that I would like to release. And I said, notice the energy shift between saying I am fat and I get to work on a plan to increase my physical activity, choose different foods, be mindful of why I'm eating, record my calories, and shift the weight, release the weight.
Yeah. And I want to add to that is that it's also allowing to feel all those emotions as you go through them and not only pick up when you're eating, because this is one of the things that I've been on my lifetime journey, is that it's allowing as new things happen too, is to kind of start peeling back all those emotions of what we stuffed down and to let them come up and just kind of take a look at them. You don't have to stay in them like you're saying, but you can experience them, you can feel them, and then let them go.
100%.
Of all of that. One of the things I wanted to ask you too, because we were touching on it, was that when people are realizing, or what tips would you give for somebody who, when we talk about grounding ourselves,
Mhm.
what's a couple simple tips that somebody could use if they don't actually know, like, how do I know if I'm grounded or not? Really basic.
I would say if you feel buzzy, if you feel wobbly, if you feel like if you've ever had your blood sugar drop, or if you've ever been on a hot day, you've been outside on a hot day and you haven't been hydrating correctly and you feel like all up here, like your feet are not physically on the ground, or you feel like you're going to get dizzy and pass out, those are signs that you're not grounded. Or if you're in a space where like you are realizing that you cannot hold your own opinion, like you can't, like you have no idea, someone asks you what you'd like to do or where you'd like to go, or something that requires a decision of some variety on your part and you can't orientate yourself to it, those are all signs that you're ungrounded. For me, a lot of times it appears first as dizziness, and I'll immediately check, when was the last time I ate, and when was last, is my sugar off, and okay. And then depending on, like, I keep shungite with me. Shungite is a black crystal. I keep shungite and black tourmaline with me. Those are superb grounders.
Mhm.
Simple tips that I recommend for, for on the go, especially for like if you have little kids that are listening to this, a really easy way for little kids to ground and cleanse simultaneously is hand washing.
Oh,
Water
that's
is a superb grounder. So going into the bathroom and rinsing off everybody else's stuff as you wash your hands. And then I like to visualize like the water turning a specific color. Doesn't mean it's going to, but like, the simple act of washing our hands. I'm washing my hands of this situation. I'm washing my hands of other people's energy. And it helps. I mean, to be in a space of like, okay, washing my hands, rinsing off. And you can do the same thing in the shower. But again, hand washing is something very unobtrusive that you can do, that most people are not, especially nowadays. Like, we're not going to be like, oh, she's washing her hands.
Right.
No one's going to say squat to you if you're washing your hands. So washing your hands is a really good way to ground and clear yourself at the same time. I like to be intentional about it, and just usually what I'll do is I'll say, I am clear, I am clear, I am clear as I'm washing my hands. Showering is a great one if you're at home, like, like if, showering and just like rinsing the day off of you. And again, if you like to visualize like layers of stuff coming off of you and like going down the drain. Fun fact, 90% of your thoughts and feelings are not yours. So having that notion of like grounding and clearing yourself and unplugging. Another way that you can ground, depending upon where you are in the country, a lot of people are in snow, areas that are snowy and cold now. Other grounding surfaces, bare feet on grass, bare feet on concrete because it has sand in it. Sand's the grounder. Bare feet in water. And here's the thing, none of this has to be stuff that is like ounces and ounces of time. Mm-hmm. You can literally, like, one of my friends goes and lets her dogs out, and she'll go in her bare feet. She's like, okay, I'm going to be brave with my bare feet for 20 seconds in the snow. She'll walk out in the snow and, have a towel by the door, and she'll walk her dogs out in the snow, and she'll stand there for a couple seconds, let her feet be cold, and intentionally ground. And then, shuffle, shimmy and shuffle back inside, get her feet on the towel. But that's grounding. I also know people who do it on wood floors, even if they're sealed. You can also you can do it on wood decks. There's lots of tips and tricks that you can use. You can also put your hands, like if you, like, one of the places that I run near my house has one area that's wood decking. And there's like all the handrails or whatever, all wood. So you can totally put your bare hands on a railing as well and ground. Doesn't have to just be with your feet. But those are excellent ways of, grounding and learning that you're ungrounded. And I always encourage people to is notice how you feel when you wash your hands. Or one of the things you can do too is if you're in a space where you can't really touch anything or you can't wash your hands or whatever, is put your feet on the ground and say, I am grounded. Just a simple act of saying, I am grounded. And it takes a little bit of time for you to notice the difference. But like once I got the hang of doing it, because a lot of times, right, we come into the space of, oh, I'm going to do a new thing, right? We have New Year's coming and people will be like, oh, I'm going to, new me, new year, new me. And we do a thing for like 2 weeks and our brain goes, oh, she's going to do that for like 2 weeks and peace out. She's going to, we know how this works. But if you get into the space of like doing it every day for 21 days, and let me tell you, one of my hacks that I like to share with people, no shame in my game, is I am clear written on my phone as a task. So I have all kinds of stuff that is tasks on my phone that my phone dings and I'm like, I'm clear, I'm clear, I'm clear. It's a simple way to clear your energy. And then if I'm in a space where I know I'm going someplace, like I'm not suggesting you can do this unless you really know your energy well. But like I can run alignments on myself while I'm driving down the road. I can ground myself while I'm driving down the road because I've been doing this for such a long time that it's rote for me. But I recommend when you first start doing it, if you're listening to this and you're like, what's grounding? Wait, what? It's just coming back into the grounded energy of Gaia, of coming into the energy of Mother Earth, and that really beautiful, like, I am centered, I am grounded. And another way you can ground is trees. And it doesn't even have to be hugging a tree. Like, you might walk up to a tree and put your hand. I always recommend telling people, if you're going to use trees, ask for permission before you touch it, because trees are living things. So you don't have to be like, hey, Mr. Tree, can I touch you? It doesn't have to be that elaborate. It can just be like saying to yourself, like looking at the tree and being like, may I touch you? May I ground with you? I've actually only had one tree say no. And I then chose a better tree, actually.
They usually call out to you though, too. That's what
Yes.
I've noticed too, is you're walking by a tree and you're like, okay, I didn't know I wanted to hug a tree, but here I go.
I love literally tree hugging. It's one of my favorite things to do.
Mhm.
Especially for, I have no idea why, but I have a thing for birch trees. And
Oh.
I love sitting on or near live oak trees. I love the beauty and the majesty of live oak trees. Like, can't even tell you, like, um, partly because most of them, because they're like 200 or 300 years old in many cases.
Mhm.
And I just like, wow, the history that they've witnessed, but that's another podcast entirely. Um, but just putting your hand on a tree and just like letting it just like pull you back down to earth. And also you can set the intention of please take all my stuff that's not serving me. And, being able to put my hands on a tree and a lot of times, like if I'm doing a hike, right, and I just put my hand on a tree, no one's going to be like, oh, you're weird. Like if you're like, because most people will do that to balance themselves while they stretch their calves or, hamstrings or whatever. So no one looks at you weird for doing it. And it's like, okay, and not that I care if someone looks at me weird, because I sure don't. But the point is if you're new to all this and you don't want people to think you're weird, if that's a thing for you, then, walking up to a tree or whatever and just using it to balance you while you stretch or whatever, beautiful energy. And these are
Oh my
easy,
gosh,
simple
yes.
things. These
Mhm.
are easy, simple things you can do. I always tell people I'm a very simple person. I am so basic, it's painful. But I like to do things that are user friendly, especially when people are new to the healing arts, they're new to woo. I like them to give them things that are like super useful for them, because the thing is you do it 2 or 3 times and I've had people do it once and been like, oh my God, that really worked. And I'm like, good, glad, because it's user friendly, right? And I want people to be in the space of knowing that there's all these tools and technologies and techniques you can use that are very quick for, helping us reground our energy. And when we're grounded and we take care of ourselves, that is the ultimate, in terms of the ability for us to ground and protect other people.
Mhm.
So if I'm in a space where I'm taking care of myself, I do it so I can take care of you. So I can hold the space for my clients, my friends, my family, the world, whoever needs me. But it's imperative, and we're terrible at self-care. A lot of people are like, oh, self-care is a bubble wrap. I'm like, no, self-care is as simple as meditation. And, a minute of meditation. I meditate in the shower. I meditate just by sitting on the end of my bed, putting my socks on and being like, because let me share a little tiny something with you that I came from a world. If you come from a world where you were taught that meditation, you had to sit in a certain way and you had to sit in lotus position on a pillow facing, whatever wall, and you had to do this and you had to meditate for at least 30 minutes and you had to do all these things and say all these things. And let me make it super simple for you. Meditation is simply the act of inhaling and exhaling. That's it. So if you inhale and exhale for 30 seconds, congratulations, you're meditating. Now, if you can do it for 30 minutes or an hour or 2 hours, knock yourself out if that's what works for you. But I like to make things super user friendly because I feel like we have all these notions of like the right way to do things. And I'm like, can we please stop? Because we've
Yes.
tried to make things
Mhm.
like being in the space of like, well, you have to do it a certain way at a certain time. And, you can only do it on Tuesdays or whatever. And I'm no. I mean, the first time that I ever meditated, I was trying to do this 30-minute meditation. It was like, just see the clouds and let the clouds go. And I remember getting frustrated because I kept thinking about like lunch and other things and the dog and the cats. And I was like, oh my God. And I stopped cold for like 3 years. Like, I can't meditate. That was my story. And then I was talking to this person and I said, I don't meditate. He's like, you really need to. It would be really benefit you. And I said, I'm terrible at meditating. So he tells me, and I tell him what I had done, how I had meditated and failed. He's like, I want to challenge you to do something when you get home. I said, okay. He goes, I want you to inhale and exhale, put a timer on your phone or put it to, kitchen timer, whatever. And I want you to set it for 2 minutes. I go, what can I do in 2 minutes? And he's like, you can meditate. I said, okay. He said, I want you to inhale and I want you to exhale. 5 count inhale, 5 count exhale. I said, okay. He said, text me and let me know how it goes. I said, okay. So I went home, did it dutifully. The people pleaser in me still quite active at that time. Did the thing and text him. He's like, how'd it go? I said, it went great. I inhaled and exhaled for 2 minutes. The timer went off and I was good. My mind didn't wander. He goes, congratulations, you're meditating.
So I want to hear when somebody hears this too, that they're going to try the 2 minute, because
I strongly encourage it. Because honestly, if you have the idea in your head that you have to like be, and then here's the other thing too, I want to tell you. And I think it's really important. Everybody has different clairs, and everybody experiences meditation differently. Everybody experiences, and your clairs are just the ways that you receive clearly your intuition. To make that really simple and easy, user friendly. So if you are used to people like the notion you always want, someone told me recently, I always want to be clairvoyant, but I'm not. And I said, okay. And she's like, my gift seems to be that I can smell things that aren't there. I said, oh, you're clairgust. She's like, oh. I said, okay. Actually, clairgust is tasting and clairalliance is smelling. The point is that she was in a space where people try so hard to have a certain clair, as opposed to go with whatever's there and allow it to expand. Like when I was a little kid, I was very clairvoyant. I didn't understand what it was at the time. I didn't have it because I grew up in a very Catholic family. So me going up and being like, hey, I just saw this guy that was wearing a top hat on the step, and like, what the hell? Probably people would have wanted to put me in an asylum at that time.
Well, and and a lot of the guests that I've had on, a lot of them have talked about their clairs that were there as they were young. They expressed them before 8, and they were shut down.
Yep.
Like, this isn't how it is here. Like, we don't know what that is, but we don't go there.
We're not touching it. We're one of my friends who's Jewish, and she's now agnostic, but she grew up very Jewish. And she said she told her grandmother that when she was a little kid, that she saw a woman in the pantry. Grandma and grandpa had a very old house, similar to my grandparents, but this was in New York, and very old house. And she kept seeing this woman like cooking in this pantry. And so she kept telling her grandma, like, something's wrong, whatever. And the grandmother kept shutting it down. So when she was in her so she didn't talk about it to anybody. And so she was in her late teens, and her grandmother was on her deathbed, and her grandmother basically said, you come from a long line of witches. You come from a long line of medicine women and, social women it was socially not acceptable to have an apothecary, to be a healer, to be a medicine woman at that time. So we, would cook, or we would, make crafts, or we would do other things where you were like putting together, like you were boiling juniper berries or whatever, whatever it would be. And you were making, tonics and that sort of thing. And she's like, so I just want to let you know, she goes, I'm sorry I didn't believe you, and I'm sorry I shut you down, but I just didn't want you to get in trouble with anybody else in the family, because in the community, it's very frowned upon. And so then when she had a mediumship reading, when her grandmother passed away, she wanted to make sure that grandma had passed and crossed over in the whole bit. And all the rest of her ancestors came forward for her as well. And basically confirmed, like, you're a very long, so she's come back into her clairs and into her gifts. But many kids were like shut down, or they see things or they hear things. And a lot of kids like are natural empaths. And when people will say, my kid's agitated, my kid won't sleep, my kid has a mouth on them, whatever. And I'm like, your kid is overloaded emotionally and doesn't have language, what to say, what to do. And I'm like, frankly, you're not helping that situation. Like, not trying to be a jerk, but we disallow our children to feel an experience because, again, we don't know what to do with it. So I'll shut it down. That fixes it. So, being in the space of inviting people to, come into their clairs. And, when I talk to people, when I talk about my clairs, like, mind shift. And I mean, the first time that I signed up for, I want to say it was Reiki. No, it was the Akash. It was the Akashic Records class that I'd signed up for. And I tell the story just because it's funny, but it's also illustrative of what happens when you lean into you lean into this work. Is I signed up for the Akashic Records course, and my teacher, mentor, friend, Emily, I was in my apartment and I remember like hearing very loud voices, like people were having a party. And I sounded like it was right out my front door. So I look up to people, there's nothing there. And I can hear it, right? And I'm like, so I go out, and there's gonna be someone that's gonna hear this, that's gonna think I'm crazy, but this is the life of not an empath. This is the life of a clairaudient sometimes. So I go outside and the sound immediately disappears. And I'm looking and there's nobody. And I'm like, okay, they heard me open the door, and I'm, big and bad and, not really, but, and I'm like, okay, they heard me. So they went inside. Okay. There's nobody on the landings. There's nobody in the parking lot. There's nobody anywhere. There's no doors closing, like people like took it inside and like that. So I message and I'm like, hey, I just signed up for your class and I'm wondering if this is a and she goes, yeah, it totally is. What has she's tell me more. And we still laugh about it because it's like, but when you when you say yes, when people ask me, like, how do I open up my clairs? Commit to the use. Commit to using them. And when I always do is like when I see double numbers, or when I see, when I hear I get messages and I get whispers, I always say thank you out loud.
That's a good practice.
Sparkles, I say thank you, and I'm like, gratitude. Thank you for sharing that. Even if and here's the thing, a lot of times you're not going to get like this whole download of a book, like, like, and I always tell them, like, think of it like, because a lot of times the downloads that we get are not meant, right? They're not meant for our brain to understand. And a lot of times we get super frustrated because we feel like, oh, my crown was tingling, as a prime example. My crown was tingling, but I didn't hear anything. I don't understand. I'm like, well, if you have an update for your computer, or you download a program, right? And you download it and then you run it. So the download is the first step, and then it runs. And you're like, don't know what it is until you try to use it, right? Like you open up the, like I just updated Firefox recently, and it's like, okay, it's updated and these are the new things and changes, right? Or like you do an update on your phone and it tells you all the new things, or you notice the font's completely different and you're like, oh, must have been an update. But the thing is that my point in sharing that is that when you get downloads, you're not necessarily supposed to understand them. Number one, they're not for your brain. Energy work is not for your brain to understand. And it's really important to comprehend that, because a lot of people get very frustrated because they're trying to understand with the mind something that's energetic.
Right.
And those two things are never going to like mesh in a way that you're going to go, aha, and have the light bulb is those two things are in two separate spaces, and that's what they're supposed to do. The other thing is they don't come in like, you get the whole book, right? So a lot of times it's like, you'll get like one piece of information, and like you get the one puzzle piece, and then you'll get another piece of the puzzle, and you'll get something else. And then all of a sudden you'll have this aha, and all the things make sense. And I've had them make sense like 2 years in arrears. Like I'm looking, like I'm paying attention. And 2 years later, I'll be like, well, that suddenly makes a whole lot more like, oh, now it makes like, and now you understand why you weren't supposed to. Yeah, okay, I'm good.
Yes. It's super powerful when you do that. And I think that, one of the things that you had mentioned too was that, like 90% of our thoughts aren't ours. So how does that fit in with if somebody's learning, they're paying attention, right? They're grounding themselves, they're starting to pay attention. How can they distinguish if that's, I call it the download or the message that you're getting, that it's theirs, or it's for them, or that it's just somebody else's thoughts, the collective?
Well, when it comes to like downloads are rare, are never not yours. So a download is always going to be for you. It just isn't a matter of whether it is like you're going to get it fully. Like sometimes it's something, when I say for you can be like it's directly for me. And sometimes too, I'll get information that I am meant to be a carrier for somebody else. Like I'm meant to share, hey, have you ever thought about blah, blah, blah to somebody else? So that can come as a download as well. When it comes to thoughts and beliefs, one of the things I encourage people to do is learn your body yes and no. So like some people will get like, and I encourage people to say things out loud. So like you might say, like one of the things that, I encourage, it's a super simple thing is, I believe in God. And, you're going to know whether you get shivers, like if you're clairsentient and you get like full body chills, or if you're, and I also encourage people to use their body pendulum, and just learn what's right and true for you. And when you get better at using your body pendulum, you can say, is this mine? Like, this doesn't feel like it resonates with me. Is this mine? And then, if it's yours, okay, then you get to deal with, do I get to keep this? Or do I get to chuck it? Or do I get to, because a lot of times if we're in a space, just give you a very, just give you a very like stark one. A woman that I knew a long time ago, she had very deep prejudices, very, very deep prejudices. And against pretty much everybody. She was equal opportunity, like everybody's offensive. Yeah. So she didn't like old people. Old people at the time for her was anybody over 50. She didn't like Black people. She didn't like Hispanic people. She didn't like Asian people. She didn't like, and so basically like anybody that we would have been hiring, she was completely against. Like you basically had to be pure as wind-driven snow, or she was not having a conversation. And then she also didn't like people with big noses, and she didn't like people with small eyes. And this was long before I was anywhere near my gifts or any of that sort of stuff. And I was like, I remember saying to her, because she was one of the people that was already working in the retail setting I was in. I did not hire her. And I said to her, I'm like, where'd all that come from? Like, that's really interesting that you have this interesting set of prejudices. Like, and I'm
small
like,
eyes. I have small eyes. So I'm like, what?
Like, it was the most bizarre thing. Like, she was intimidated by people with big noses, and she thought I had a big nose. And she goes, you have a big nose. I don't like you. And I go, well, here's the deal. I'm the manager of the store now. So if you don't like it, you can quit. And she goes, I guess I'll learn to live with your nose. And I'm like, well, good, because it's attached to the rest of me, which is in charge of you. And so, but here's the thing. So she had been told by the previous manager who'd been fired that she was going to help find new people.
Oh.
And I said, here's the deal. You're going to go through applications, and you're going to, and I went through all the applications with a marker. And I went through the part about their race and blacked it all out on every single application. All of them. My boss was not pleased, but I did this on all of them. It was like 50 or so applications, and I was like, nah, on all of them. And I said, here's the deal. And she's like, why did you black out? So then she's looking at a blank application. She goes, why did you blank out the race part? And I said, because we don't pick people based on their race. I want you to look at availability. So the first two things I want you to look at are their availability, the hours and the days they're available. That's the first thing, two things I want you to look at. And the third thing I want you to look at is how much they want per hour. Those are the only three things I want you to look at. And I want you to put that. So I've done this whole elaborate thing for her. And I said, if you can't do this, then you can't keep working here. And so I inadvertently trained her out of prejudice because she got to come in and tell me every time there was someone there to interview.
Ah.
And I was like, okay. And I'm like, what's your first impression? And she'd be like, they're Black, or they're this, or they have a, or this, he has really small feet, or, this one doesn't know how to dress, or I don't think they want the job because they kind of are frumpy, or this is an older lady, or whatever, right? And I go, okay. And after we'd hired new people, and I said, is my job threatened? I said, not at all. But you're either going to be a team player and you're going to play with all the people and you're going to learn to get along with other people, because listen, I'm like, you got a long life ahead of you. She was in her early 20s. And I said, you have a long, long life ahead of you. And you're going to have to learn to get along with people when you go to college, if you go to college, and just living life. Everybody's not a terrible person because they don't look just like you. And I said, by the way, you have, by your looking at me and saying, I have a large nose. I'm like, your nose is bigger than mine. It fits your face beautifully. I'm like, but this notion that you're like excluding and including people, you're going to miss out on a lot of really amazing people in the world if you're just deciding like all the things. And, I feel like we come into a space sometimes of, when it comes to our clairs, like a lot of times, one of the most frustrating things I find with my clients, right, is we prejudge how we want them to show up, right? Like people will go, oh, I want, I really want to be, this clair or that clair. I want to see this, and it's like, okay, so what's the thing? Like you want to trust, like if you see it, then you trust it's real. And they're like, well, something like that. I'm like, okay, well, can you trust that if you just know, like, or can you trust that if you get a chill or you get goose flesh, like when you're walking up to somebody or you're walking away from a situation, that it's real? And they're like, I hadn't thought of that. I'm like, here's the deal. And I had someone tell me, I believe because you believe, and you are so solid in your beliefs. And I'm like, and I've had to hone it, because here's the thing. It doesn't just snap like that. And one day you're asleep and one day you're awake and like, boom, right? It's a process. It's such a process. And like, if you had, like, I was thinking about this recently, like, wow, if I think about who I am now going into 2022 versus who I was when I started my journey in 2011, and like the girl that I was growing up, and like all the clairvoyant experiences that I had, like seeing the girl in the white dress in the hayfield behind the 200-year-old house that my dad used to rent, or like seeing some of the other things that I've seen, and like now, like growing into it now, like being a medium now, and like the things that I get to see and do and witness. And I had someone say, I don't believe anything coming out of your mouth. And I go, okay. But it's a process to get there, right? I mean, like, because I used to be in a space of like, when I first realized I was a medium, I was like, oh my God. When I first realized because one of my specialties is reading houses. I love reading historic homes. And people will often say to me, oh, please don't go read up on the history of the house. I'm like, the house isn't going to tell me the history that's written in the books. Like the house is going to, the energy that's there is going to share with me the lives of the indentured servants, or the people who, the servants, or the slaves, or the people, the bad stuff that happened that no one wants to talk about, or the fire that happened, or why, there was one house that I read, and I kept seeing like two separate implants of the two separate like footprints of the house. And I said to the homeowner, I said, this house was built in like the house was built in like the 1890s. I said, was a house raised to build this house? And she said, yes, it was. I said, okay, that's what I'm seeing. So I was seeing a foot, like her house goes this way with the front door facing this way and the house going back, like a townhouse, only not. And the house that I was seeing was facing sideways.
Oh, that's interesting.
so it was like this whole thing where as I'm reading the house, I'm like, there's a different imprint on this house. And I was like, so they built over and they never cleared the land. So there's two imprints on top of each other. And that's actually way more common. Like if things were like, especially in the South, there's a lot of times when like there's a house that was there or there's an imprint of something that was there beforehand. And people would say, do you think you could excavate? I'm like, you probably could. And I'm like, but sometimes, you know, we're in the space of like they'll share the histories with me, right? Of like, you know, why things happened a certain way or like why people, and I'm like, you know, I'm not interested when it comes to mediumship. The thing I love most about doing it is I love clearing people and like sending people that are stuck on their way. And helping people, you know, when it comes to mediumship and having conversations with people's loved ones is reassuring our loved ones that they are, you know, there are people here on earth that our loved ones crossed over and that they're okay. Because so often we're like, oh my God, you know, the most common thing I hear from people is, I'm afraid that so-and-so is not okay on the other side. I'm like, and the irony is they're worried about you because they are
Right.
perfect. I'm like, when they cross over and they pass away, like people are like, oh, aren't you afraid to go to graveyards? I'm like, no, why? Well, there's dead people there. Yeah. And their soul's not there. So there's just lots of dead bodies. And it's like, I hate to be like melodramatic about it or whatever, or to be like, but the reality of it is that cemeteries aren't as, you know, aren't nearly as, a lot of people like make it to be way more than it is. And I'm like, no, I would be more concerned about houses that are 150, 200, 300 years old that have never been cleared, where stuff has happened, where there's like energy stuck.
Yes, yes, I'm with you. I've had two different places that I stayed at. One was back in 2011, 2012. I needed to rent a place. I wasn't quite ready to sell my house, and I'd taken a job a couple hours away. Wanted to make sure it was going to be okay. I rented this garden home, and it was literally a nightmare. I've still have never experienced what was there. The second night I was there, I woke up and somebody was there. This older person was there screaming at me, screaming. I think I ended up staying there for another couple weeks. It wasn't that long because it kept happening. And it was a really scary thing. Like I remember going into the closet and I remember thinking, oh my God, somebody wants to close me in this closet. Like it was, it, yeah, it was really, I called in a couple different people about this house, and it was this huge portal. And anyway, I left one night because it was so scary. And then they started going after my dog. I had my blue, who 90-pound pit bull they were going after, where he was just shaky. Like he was scared. That night we packed up. I never went back in the house. I actually paid somebody to go in to take out my stuff, and I never went back. I went someplace else for 6 months or 4 months, whatever it was, until I sold my other house and, you know, bought a newer house. But that experience stayed with me. About, come to find out, it was the home had been an older lady who had gotten passed away, and she was just kind of like, she was pissed off that people were in her house, and she hadn't, like, there was something around when she passed too, right? So she obviously needed to do something. But I can tell you, that was the scariest thing I have ever gone through. And I kept trying to protect myself, and you know, it just brought in two different people. They could not clear it out. Couldn't
Well,
clear
I
it
think
out. I'm like, okay, it's time to go.
sometimes too is, you know, is the thing too is like, sometimes they don't want to be cleared.
Mhm.
Sometimes they just want this property to be left alone. And, you know, that happens sometimes too, is it's like, if you're in the space where you just want the memories to be that like as you left it, um, excuse me, there was actually a house in Florida that happened with, and I was following this page, and this all these people were like, why isn't someone trying to save it? And I piped up and said, they don't want it saved. They would like it stabilized and preserved, but they do not want anybody living in this house. They're very explicit about that. They're very explicit about, the ancestors are very explicit about that. And they're like, why? I'm like, they're not telling me why. They just, and I was like, but it's important sometimes to be in the space of like, because people want to save every house and whatever. And it's like, sometimes they don't want to be saved. And, the thing too is that you brought up another really important point about how how you call people in. And I think it's important sometimes to realize, as healers, as gifted people, as people in the healing arts, no matter what your modality is, it is always safe and it is always okay to discern, to do it with discernment, but you are never a bad person, healer, etc., for needing outside help. And I think there's this huge misnomer about that nowadays, that like, if I was such a good whatever modality you do, then I wouldn't need help, right? And I think that, I started talking to people recently, I'm like, I went to my chiropractor like 2 weeks ago, and my chiropractor, who's famous, the actually owner of the clinic, is quite famous. And he was in there to get adjusted. And he took a number just like everybody else does. It was doing his spine exercises just like everybody else was, the whole thing, just like everybody else was. And then he got adjusted by the chiropractor that does adjust all the rest of us. And I said, surgeons don't do their own surgeries. Massage therapists don't give themselves massages. Dentists don't clean their own teeth. My chiropractor can't do his own adjustments. So it's important that we realize, as givers, as practitioners, that it is not only okay, but we need help. We need to have that blind spot person. I like to call them side mirrors, right? We need to have those side mirrors in life to be like, hey, you're off course, or hey, that person that I see a red flag, that's not a declaration, sweetheart. Love you, but
yeah. Right. Yeah. And you've been my side mirrors for a couple pretty big decisions that I've made, because I couldn't tell. I'll retrace that, because that's not all truth. There was something that was telling me, and then we have a session and for something else completely, right? And then what you shared was like, no, you need to deal with this first, and it was those side mirrors. And I think what we're both in agreement with is that you also, I think, need to understand, if that's not my area where I've done a lot of work, it's better for me to not even try to do much with it, but to call in somebody. In fact, when I brought in the second person, I told them I'd already worked with somebody else, and it was virtually. They weren't physically there. And this is before people, really was doing a lot of virtual stuff. And she just said, this is more than what I'm capable of doing. Here's who I'll refer you to, but having that awareness, that respect of, what, this is not mine. Like, I haven't had the same experiences as you. So that's not really why I work with people. I work with people for different things. And that's, which is really to own their own worth, their own, get rid of the imposter syndrome. Not that I particularly care for that word, but to actually know who I need to go work with, depending on what issues they have, whether it's the house property, the trauma. So yeah, so this has just been such a powerful conversation, so full of so many practical ways for people, whether they've been practicing something for 10 years or they just found this podcast and this is the first time and they're like, what are you guys talking about? Right. Like I think it's super important for people to understand that there's a reason why there's so many different types of healers. And
Yes.
even within each modality, right? Like Reiki is so well known. I call it
Mhm.
like the gateway
Mhm.
because it just is, because it's, and I'm grateful that it is, because it just gives people access to go finding out what, which one works with their clairs, which energies do they
Mhm.
like, etc. And so now if somebody is hearing this and they're like, wow, I really like your style, how can they reach you, Jillie?
They can find me on Facebook at Jillie Maria Transformational Catalyst. They can also find me at Fire and Ice Transformational Coaching, also on Facebook. They can join my free group, Awakening with Grace. The website is in progress rather. So probably by the time that this is published, JillieMaria.com, JillieMaria.com will be the website for all the things, will be central for everything. The coaching, the public speaking, the free sources, the resources, all of it. So I encourage them to absolutely reach out if you have questions. There's lots of different ways that you can reach me, and I'm happy to field, questions. I do a lot Akashic Records live in my group every Monday night.
Yeah, it's
Um,
powerful. Mhm.
and I love just sharing that resource freely. I love introducing people to the Akashic Records. So yeah, I'm looking forward to sharing more.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I highly, suggest that people come to your group, that it is so powerful to sit there. And what I've noticed, and I'm going to piggyback on that, is as you're calling in and answering somebody else's very specific question, not just some general question, but as you answer their specific question, I get something out of their questions. So whether or not my question comes up or not, with the time frame that you have, that it is it's so beneficial just to watch the whole process of it. So but highly recommend everybody go there. I'll list everything out in the show notes too, so
Awesome.
that you could just click on it, as well as in YouTube. So thank you so much, my friend, for being here. This
You're
has been
welcome.
such a beautiful conversation, and we will say goodbye. Thank you.
Bye for now.